Hello and welcome to another edition of Agenda 2063 TV show, the only series in Ghana, the region and the continent, telling you authentic stories about the AU, its institutions, and specifically Agenda 2063. And even as we're going to be spending the better part of this series looking at areas around the African Continental Free Trade Area, we're still going to be talking about Agenda 2063 and all the important areas that we need to focus on. And let me just say that today we're having a throwback to Aspiration 3, which I'll be unpacking a little bit in a moment with my guest. But I'll be having two segments up in a minute. We have the APRM Watch, Africa Peer Review Mechanism Watch, and the Ear on East Africa. Very exciting segments, so don't go away. Welcome back from the break, and welcome to another edition of the Africa Peer Review Mechanism Watch. This is an opportunity to update listeners and followers on developments around the African Peer Review Mechanism, which is based in Midrand, South Africa, telling the democratic governance story of Africa. Now, if there is one thing that recent developments in Côte d'Ivoire and Mali have reminded us, it is that democracy promotion continues to be at the forefront of ECOWAS's work. Now, why is this important? This is important because ECOWAS has been blasting with intention the whole idea of democracy for the past 45 years of its existence. Next month, for example, will be 30 years since ECOMOG troops went into Liberia, Ghana and Nigeria, leading to rescue Liberians from the murderous onslaught of Charles Taylor. 1990 to 1997, the war was raged for 7 good years. Eventually, Liberia, is at peace. Thanks to some Ghanaian and Nigerian and a whole lot of ECOWAS involvement, Liberia has been at peace for a very long time, even if it has had issues. But democracy has continued to be very important at the regional and the continental level, for which reason, the APRM has expanded its mandate. And just before we end the segment, we'll be giving a bit of education as to why and where from this mandate expansion. But you see, this whole idea about democracy is so important because it is also in fulfillment of Agenda 2063's Aspiration 3 that talks about an Africa of good governance, democracy, respect for human rights, justice, and the rule of law. Some say it's very consistent with the Sustainable Development Goal 16, which talks about peaceful, just, and inclusive societies. But for the APRM specifically, let's just do a little bit of education. The APRM, the decision for the expansion of the mandate back in November 2018 harks back to this particular protocol, which is the AU Assembly Decision, AU/DEC.63128. This is important as education, so that we know where from this whole expansion. And that particular protocol refers to what they call the revitalization of APRM to track implementation and oversee the monitoring and evaluation in key governance areas on continent. Now, let's take a quick look at what's happening. The APRM. Just only today, the Africa Peer Review Mechanism Youth Network is launching a youth webinar series on impact of COVID-19 on political governance, peace and security in Africa. And I understand it has probably already taken place. It was led from the Secretariat in South Africa. And the Youth Network pushed this with the Peace and Security Department of the AU. And the second most important thing for the APRM is that the APRM now has formally, and at least the South African government has formally announced one Thulani Tsefuta, who is the new chairperson of South Africa's Africa Peer Review Mechanism National Governing Council, the NGC, which leads the structure of 32 representatives in the whole in 9 provinces in South Africa. Now, this is important because even as we're talking about the Africa Peer Review Mechanism, domesticating, like last week I talked about domesticating in Kenya. And in Ghana too, we were seeking to do some domestication at the local level. In South Africa, a far bigger country than Ghana, it makes sense to have some kind of domestication of the Africa peer review mechanism. So a continental issue being domesticated at the national level is important, because it therefore then makes sense. People are able to relate to it and then understand why the Africa peer review mechanism is an important element in the democratic dispensation of that country and also the rest of the other countries. And next week we'll be talking a little bit more about some updates and some important developments around the Africa peer review, and maybe an update on the seminar. So we're going to take a quick break in a minute and we'll bring you the next segment. We'll be right back. Welcome back from the break, and I'm happy to be presenting to you another edition of Aeon East Africa. This is the space where we give you very quick updates on developments around East Africa. A lot is going on in West Africa. Last week I talked about the fact that we have so many crises going on. We have democracy crises, we have Sahel, we have terrorism, we have all these issues that are happening in West Africa. East Africa has its own share of these problems as well, but it also has locusts, which are a big problem. But I said last week also that this week I was going to give you some good news, and so good news I have brought in its wake. And starting off with Kenya, there's some very important information coming on the Twitter feed that Kenya's trade data, which was published in May 2020, shows that the country has experienced a significant improvement in exports. You know that Kenya exports a lot of flowers and a whole lot of other things as well. But despite COVID and all the chaos around that, Kenya has demonstrated an improvement in exports in the first quarter, and that's obviously very good news for it. And there's also some very important news regionally as well. Kenya is part of the East Africa community, and I've talked about the East Africa community comprising 6 countries: Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda, Burundi, and South Sudan. And they have a common market. The common market, as we have in West Africa, simply is about being able to trade goods tariff-free, quota-free, and so on. And they are a little bit more advanced than we are in West Africa. Their economic integration in East Africa has been quite solid for a number of years. Now, the statistics are showing that their common market has boosted inter-regional trade. So that is to say, trade between in that region among the member states up to 60%. Now, despite the fact that COVID has hit and has had a major impact in that region, especially with issues around truckers being stuck at borders, not being able to be tested for COVID and all these things, which we don't have in West Africa. This whole issue of trade corridors and truckers delivering goods and being stuck because of COVID. We don't have that in West Africa, thankfully. This has dominated news for the better part of the COVID period in East and parts of Southern Africa. And that has hit a snag in relations among East African countries, but they've been doing pretty well trying to resolve that. And it's very interesting to read that despite all these issues, the trade has gone up to 60%. So it's something that we can definitely learn from, that despite, even as you have a challenge, even as you have a problem with your member states and with a pandemic looming, how is it therefore possible to still keep your economic integration going? That's something certainly that we'll be taking a look a bit more closely at in the next couple of weeks. But finally, just to end on East Africa, there's some new research that is pointing to the fact that there's a partnership between AERC and Trademark East Africa. Trademark East Africa is a very well-known name in East Africa. Private sector-led organization, some will say even donor, that is offering good money for the development of economic integration. And what they have done with AERC is that AERC is the research company, the research consortium, African Economic Research Consortium, and it has partnered Trademark East Africa to build data and evidence for policy decisions in East Africa. The whole idea of this partnership is to support a research program that will increase the availability of data and evidence to support inclusive trade and gender policies in the region. The program is worth $500,000 and is funded by the government of the Netherlands and will be implemented until 2023. Some of the partners are talking about the fact that this is critical for private investments because the markets respond to policy clarity, which simply means that the more data you have, the easier it is to make decisions that will allow for better, decisions at the policy level and the governmental level to be made as well. So that's some very good news for that region, something which I pray and hope that can be replicated also in this part of the world. But we live in hope. And like I said last week, though we do pray a lot, I also hope that we will take more actions than we do pray in this part of the world. So thank you for that. We'll be taking a break in a minute, and then we'll get back to the main beef of the discussion where I introduce my very important guest. We'll be right back. Welcome back from the break. My name is E.K. Benson Jr. I'm your regular host for Agenda 2063 TV show. I'm very happy to be presenting to you a very important discussion on Africa's democracy. You will all have by now downloaded the Agenda 2063 booklet, and if you haven't, and there's a very small booklet this size, and you should be reading it every single day as you're following the show. But the most important thing you need to recall from this whole Agenda 2063 is that it's seeking to make Africa a better continent for all of us. It has 7 aspirations, and aspiration 3 is very relevant today because aspiration 3 speaks to the whole issue of an Africa of good governance, democracy, respect for human rights, justice, and the rule of law. Some say this is very consistent with Sustainable Development Goal 16. Of the UN, which talks about peaceful, just, and inclusive societies. They have shortened it. As usual in Africa, we have gone the long route and made it very long. But that's another story. The most important thing is what we're seeking to do with this aspiration. We all want a peaceful, secure continent where we can all live in peace, where we can all have good governance, democratic values, gender equality, respect for human rights, and so on and so forth. And there are some institutions that have been seeking to do this, or at least seeking to promote this for the better part of 15, 16, 17 good years. But in this specific case, I'm very happy to introduce to you Juliet Ampah, Executive Director of Penplusbytes. When I first came across Penplusbytes many years ago, in 2006 was my first encounter with Penplusbytes, when I took a certificate from what was then the International Institute of ICT Journalism. It was mixing that with Penplusbytes, but now Penplusbytes seems to be the name that has become quite prominent. I'm going to ask Juliet a little bit to give us some background into the genesis, the history of Penplusbytes from all those days back to where it has come now, where it is known for a lot of things: democracy promotion, civic engagements, and also a lot of important issues around inclusion, fighting disabilities, and also even recently on COVID as well. So, Juliet, very happy to have you in the studio. It's good to see you after a long while, and hope you're keeping safe.
We are trying to. We are trying to. Thank you very much.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about Penplusbytes. You celebrated 19 years of its existence just last week.
That's right.
Obviously, it's a little fanfare. I'm sure you did a virtual celebration or something.
That's correct. That's correct. So, yes, thank you very much for having us on the show.
Okay.
Penplusbytes is, as you say, a tech-based organization that has been working in Africa, specifically in about 14 African countries for a good part of 19 years. And when we first started out, our main agenda was to train journalists to, as it were, tell data-driven stories. And we felt that it was important that they were telling stories that people could relate to, that were measurable, and that led to actual developmental and behavioral changes in society.
Let's back up a bit. Data-driven stories, is that stories that are driven by the data that we use on our phone? You have to expand a bit on that.
No, actually, so we were looking more at how do numbers in any given situation, how do they pan out? So when you say Kenya or Ghana has discovered oil and that we're lifting about 50 billion gallons of oil, crude oil per day, how much money is that? And what's the breakdown of what that money can do? Because people are not able to assimilate that kind of information if you just gave it in the raw form. And so we're looking at using data in its, whether it's monetary data, whether it's demographics or population data, to tell stories. So when you say we are in a deficit of 1 million houses in Ghana, for example.
It needs to make sense to ordinary individuals.
What does it mean? Because as far as they're concerned, everybody lives somewhere. Even if it's just in a kiosk, it's somewhere. So to say that there's a deficit of 1 million or 2 million, or that there are 3 million people that are unemployed, it's difficult for people to understand. And so that's the sort of journalism that we were asking our journalists to focus on in terms of telling stories in relatable ways. But fast forward, we've moved a lot from there in the 19 years. We still do work with journalists, but we are now more interested in how development journalism can actually help build institutions and help build our democracies. And so we're looking at how do we train journalists to look out for leaks in the system, anti-corruption issues? How do we also ourselves model that behavior through the projects that we do? And so we've kind of moved a little bit more into the developmental area, where we're looking at all the areas that actually build a country and a nation. And that would include things like helping with civic participation and just mobilizing citizens themselves to be more engaged and more interested in democratic spaces. And a lot of that we do is underpinned by technology, because we do know that technology is a multiplier. And so we do look at finding very low-tech solutions to the civic challenges that we face.
Sorry to interrupt. I do like that point you make about low-tech, because as you will know, Ghana is not the best place to have the most important internet connections. Even though we pioneered it in 1995, we still are struggling to have stable internet all over the place. Even Wi-Fi across the capital has not happened, whereas countries like Rwanda have been doing it for a couple of years. So how do you navigate, some of these challenges in the work that you do to ensure that, there's as much inclusion as possible and that you also get the work that you're doing delivered?
Great question. So over the last couple of months especially, or maybe I should say years, we've done quite a number of things. So when it comes to elections, which are for us the mainstay of any democracy, that ability for any group of people to be able to replace or reaffirm or remove their elected and duty bearers, elected officers and duty bearers. That mainstay of democracy for us is something worth galvanizing and mobilizing around. And for us, we feel that if you do a lot of that mobilization and you leave out key segments of the society, which includes PWDs, that's people with disabilities, and you leave out people who are not as literate as the rest of us. And Ghana does have quite a large number of people who you would call not functionally literate. Because they haven't got the required amount of school that there is to do critical thinking or to be able to engage with the official language, which is the English language. And so we do focus a lot on those groups of people. And yes, we have faced challenges because yes, there's accessibility issues, but there's also the issues that I've mentioned. When people are disabled, visually impaired, or hard of hearing, or you know, they've said that there are groups that say hard of hearing isn't a disability, and actually we should call it what it is, which is deafness. And so there are those groups of people, and so the kind of interventions that you do for more able-bodied communities, it's difficult to tweak that to meet those other people in the society. And so we do find that it's not just about the lack of access or the lack of technology, or even when we do low-tech solutions, you still find that there are lots of people who are left behind because of the language of tech. And that's something that we have spent the last couple of weeks, the last couple of months, I should say, trying to figure out how do we get that many more people involved in what we're doing.
So you're probably talking about not just using journalists, but a different demographic that can help complement the work that journalists also do. Right. So what that suggests to me, therefore, is that obviously with these challenges, what in your view needs to immediately be done? Is it that the magic wand of stable internet will do the trick, or there's a bigger, larger issue that needs to be done?
As I say, there is a bigger, larger issue. It's not just about access. Yes, data is expensive. You mentioned places like Rwanda, places like Kenya, where they are on top of their tech games and their infrastructure. They're investing a lot in infrastructure. They've got the regulatory policy environment that's supporting all the work that they're doing in terms of making sure that all villages and all communities are connected. We are not quite there yet in Ghana, but it's not just about that. That's not the reason why people are getting left behind. As I say, it's a myriad of issues. It's the language of choice that we're using on these platforms. It's also the ability to use, so we take it for granted that everyone can use a smartphone, but not everyone can afford a smartphone or use a smartphone. And so how do you reach out to those people who can't necessarily use a smartphone? Does that mean that you can't use tech to somehow reach them, to somehow get them into that space, with that virtual space, that online space, or even in the real world where they can engage with the democratic institutions that we're building?
So give me an example of some of the things that you've been able to do over the past couple of years, where you've been able to offer a solution that is low tech and maybe even lower than low tech, but still being able to solve that problem.
So that's a difficult one, because most of our projects are interlinked, and I must confess that we've focused a lot on the able-bodied, smartphone-using population, but only in the last kind of, especially since COVID reared its ugly head. We, like everybody else, we've been forced to kind of reassess what we've been doing. It's a very fast evolving situation, and we do find that in as much as we'd like to push out information, push out data, we are still leaving people behind. So what we've done in recent times is to mash up our tech solutions. And so I'll give you an example, as you say. Recently with COVID, we do know that there's a myriad of what's it called? Fake news, bad news, disinformation that's going on out there. And we found that a lot of it is visual. So you find it in closed text-based platforms such as WhatsApp. And you do find that the information is a skit or a video taken out of context or that sort of thing. How do you get it to my grandmother who's 19 hours away from the biggest city? What we've done is that we've taken those kind of videos, we've reenacted the skits, we've put them into different languages, and we put them in podcasts. Now, some people will say that podcasts are elitist tools, but we do find that when we put them in podcasts and we link up with our community radio networks, they are able to play back those conversations and skits at their own time in through different channels to the people who need it the most. And so you use highbrow technology such as a podcast or something that's online based, app based, and then you bring it into the real world by merging it with traditional methods.
We're going to stick with the real world still, but we need to take a break and we'll be right back. Welcome back from the break, and I have in my studio today Juliet Ampah of Penplusbytes. She's the Executive Director, and she has happily given us her time to tell us a little bit about the major highlights of Penplusbytes' 19-year history on democracy promotion and civic participation, and more recently working with people with disabilities. As she rightly said, COVID has compelled us to reassess a lot of things, and therefore Penplusbytes has also done the same thing, reassessing its work as well and how it can better adjust it to suit the mandate that it is serving. But at the end of the day, then Penplusbytes has been doing a lot of great work on democracy promotion. And as Juliet was elaborating on, we'll just get back to her in a minute, she's explaining how podcasts are being used to help fight fake news. Essentially, that's what basically you're doing. That must take a lot of time. How many people are involved? If you can just give us a sense.
It does. So the whole production of what we're doing currently is we're working with our journalists. It always goes back to our journalists and our network of journalists. We have a network of more than 3,000 journalists that we work through across the continent. In Ghana, our database is about 1,200 journalists based in Ghana. And what we've decided to do is work with a core group of about 100 of those. And what we've done is we've deployed them into the regions. There are now 16 regions in Ghana where when we used to have 10, but we've deployed them around the regions. We're asking them to find those stories that haven't made it into the mainstream. Stories about how people are coping on a day-to-day, how people are observing protocols, or what are the gaps. And what they then do is send us that information in a script with sound bites, and those sound bites are then taken to the Ghana Bureau of Languages. And so we've co-opted the Bureau of Languages so that they can now produce the information from English into 5 of the locally prominently spoken Ghanaian languages. And so once they do that kind of recording, we then now produce it into a podcast using some of the podcast editorial suites, and then we send that off to our community radio stations, and then they play back on given days across the country.
So that's a large network. So you got your journalists, you got your Ghana Bureau of Languages, and you got your
the team that does the actual editing for the podcast and make sure that it's within limits, the sound, everything. And then we send it off to the Ghana Community of Radio Networks, and that's about a member-based organization of about 200 community radios.
That's across Ghana?
That's across Ghana.
Okay.
So
you would think that with all the commercial radio stations and community radio, it wouldn't be that much of a prominent thing. But clearly, from what you're saying, the community radio still plays a very important role in the democracy promotion that you're also trying to do.
That's correct. It's one of those key things. As I keep saying, we're not a terribly well-lettered. I think that our literacy rates are some of the highest in Africa, about 76% when I last checked. But I always like to say 76% of what? Can they actually, it's one thing to be literate and to be able to string sentences together. It's another thing to be able to engage with news and understand the process that's gone into the making of the message and what that message is trying to get you to do. And so that's a form of literacy, media information literacy is missing. And so what we tend to find is that people tend to actually want to engage with the community radio stations. There's a plethora of them, and they want to engage with those because then they are hearing the news in a language that is their first language rather than their third, fourth, or fifth language.
So something that is relatable. And of course, I suspect that with elections coming up in a couple of months' time as well, you're going to be needing a lot of these as well.
That's correct.
So basically, that's, as I said, that's a large network, that's a large database as well. What that therefore means is being able to also navigate the minefield of, of good and cordial relations in all these things. It cannot be easy. You're a civil society organization, and funds are not always readily available. So what do you do, or what have you been able to do at times when the funds have not been so great, but you still need to get this work done? I asked this specifically because there are a number of grassroots organizations in Africa, as we do know, that are coming up and would like some experiences on and lessons from your experience in these 19 years.
Well, good that you mentioned the elections. A key part of the work that we've done through our African Elections Project, which we instituted in 2008. That's about 7 years after we began business in 2001. So in 2008, we started the African Election Project. And what that does is that it works on giving an assessment of what's the state of play in any country across Africa that's looking at holding an election. So we investigate the EMBs, we put across their readiness, and when I say EMB, it's for the electoral management bodies. And so we look at an assessment of that. We analyze what the candidates themselves across are saying. We put, and all of that is available on our platform, and that's what we've done over the years. So in Ghana, in 2012, 2016 elections, we were particularly interested in mobilizing the society, mobilizing citizens, get them off their butts, citizen apathy, to actually go and vote, get involved. We do that by providing, if you like, a voter's compass, telling them what individual candidates are saying and what would align with their needs and based on a poll. And so the process is you take a poll of what citizens are thinking, and then you do a voter's compass looking at the manifesto promises and all the other things that the candidates are talking about, and you kind of match that. Here's what the citizen needs, here's what this candidate is saying, who is best going to serve your interests. And that's what we've done over the years. Now, coming back to your main question, which is, so what do you do when there's no funding? Luckily for us, we've 19 years of experience under our belt. And so there's lots and lots of things to talk about, lots and lots of different things to leverage on or leverage off of. So, for example, in the last 6 weeks, we've started what we call our webinar series. And it's Election Watch, Election in Ghana. So it's a countdown to elections in December in Ghana. And we're able to do that because, one, we've built a good network of people that we can rely on to come and speak as panelists on our webinars for free. We also then have a good stock of things, of examples of things that we've done, of ideas. And so we're able to leverage on that kind of pedigree and to get things done whilst we wait for funding.
And so, specifically on the elections, I do know, for example, that for the past, I think 2012 and 2016, Penplusbytes had something like this multimedia monitoring center or so. This is a very high-tech name.
It's called a social media tracking center. And we've done it for the last kind of 3 elections.
So tell us a bit about that and how it works.
Right. So our social media tracking center, we did it with Juliet Tech. And it's just simply an aggregator, if you like. And so what we do with the social media tracking center is that we send out, we feed the system with keywords. It's an algorithm. You feed it with keywords, and it's able to crawl across social media, Facebook, Twitter, and other Reddit, you know, all those social media networks. It's able to crawl across it and to highlight those key words that you yourself have put in. And why have we engaged when we call it Aggie the aggregator? And so Sister Aggie does a lot of work for us and has helped us in the 3 previous elections, 2008, 12, and then 16. What we are interested in is how can we feed to the EC, the Electoral Commission in Ghana, where there are issues, because we found that in each election, tensions were always very high. We always found that there were hotspots and flare points, and so we thought that the best thing to do was to use social media, this tracking system, to diffuse those situations. And so what we would do is we would put in words such as snatching a ballot box, for example, or you know, long queues, or thievery, or you know, whatever those words are, those words that keep coming up at elections. I'm sure this year there'll be things like fake news, or you know, guns and that sort of thing. So we feed that system with those keywords. And now when people tweet in an area, so you find all of a sudden that Facebook users or Twitter users in a certain area, in a certain constituency, are all tweeting about how someone has just slapped somebody, or somebody has just grabbed a ballot box and run off with it. Those, you see it on the system as a ping, and so it hits a couple of times. So there's a certain concentration. We pick it up in the back room, we analyze it, and we're able to say, okay, this is what's happening in this constituency. Either it's because the BVR kit is frozen, or you know, the EC's officials are not doing the right thing, or actually it's the communities themselves. We're able to do that analysis, and we're able to feed that back into the EC, and the EC takes it up with the National Security Task Force, and they're able to diffuse the situation. And we've done that for the last 3 elections. This year we're adding on, so that was mainly for social media, but this year we're adding on traditional media as well, because we do realize that Facebook, for example, has kind of shut its back door. You can no longer program or send an algorithm to do that kind of aggregation that I'm talking about. Twitter is still available to us, and some of the other platforms are available. WhatsApp is not necessarily social media, it's
more messages,
a messaging app, but of course that's what most Ghanaians used or use, and so we're interested in looking at how this year we can add WhatsApp Watch, we can monitor radio and TV and see where, because journalists on the ground who are interviewing people will come across very tense situations and be able to feed that back to us. So this year we're calling it an all media tracking center, and we'll be deploying it during the election period. It's usually run for the 3 days, you know, on the day before the election, on the election day, and just the day after. So it's 3 days, and it's quite a lot of work. You need volunteers to sit in there watching the spaces. You need foot on the ground where they can verify, because you do need to verify the claims that are on social media. Sometimes people just type things and you go on the ground and it's not as is. And so we do have quite a network of people working to validate that information before we send it off to the authorities to work on.
That's a lot of coordination and networking, which you obviously need to put into place before the elections. And of course, with all, I'm sure, the noise that has been going on around registration and so on and so forth, in the context of COVID as well, how has that frustrated, or you know, the work that you're doing as well? Because now there's that headache of the general election issues that come, but also in the context of a health, you know, pandemic. How do you reconcile the two, given your limited, you know, funding as well? Well,
at Penplusbytes, we've been very kind of disappointed with the way that our electoral commission and our state has handled this year's elections. We feel that there was a lot of opportunity to look at introducing technology. I mean, elections can be run end to end with technology. If you do the planning and infuse the systems with intelligence, it will be able to walk you through the whole system. And so we felt that this registration of voters, for example, they could have, what they've introduced for people with disabilities and older citizens, where they are able to print a form off the system and go to their district office so as not to stand in a queue. They go to the district office and actually take their biometric data and go home. We think that it could have been extended to pretty much everybody, and so that you do most of the things online, and then you show up at the
The district office.
The district, no, not the district office, the polling station or whatever, okay. The registration center, to actually pick up your card. It could have been done in that way, so that we didn't have that tension. But here we are, we've built up that tension already with the kind of registration that we're doing, as you rightly say, in this health pandemic. And so we are looking and furiously working with others to diffuse that tension before election day. But then obviously there are still a lot of people who feel disenfranchised because they did not go out, they didn't feel safe enough to go to the registration points to register. And so if tech had been introduced into that, regardless of what we've been talking about in terms of access and just the widespread nature of it, it still could have been managed and a lot more people would have gone out to register.
I think that's one very important takeaway that we will have as we're wrapping up the show. We just have a couple of minutes left. But I think the most important thing, therefore, to ask now is that you've celebrated 19 years. What next for the 20th celebration of Penplusbytes? Where do you foresee the organization going as it seeks to deepen the democracy? Because obviously 2020 is a very, very different year than all the other election years because of COVID, and therefore there are lessons that will be picked from that for the next election in 2024. In your view, is there anything that you are quickly working on that you think may be of use to other organizations who are watching you and thinking, we like what Penplusbytes is doing, how can we support them, how can we help, pick up what they've been doing, and so on? What are some of the takeaways that you would offer in about a minute or two?
Right, I think that what's very glaring in this COVID pandemic is just the inequalities that exist in access to information. And so a lot of the work that we will be doing going forward is just looking at breaking down further the messages that, whether it's politicians, whether it's democratic institutions, such as SHRAJ or whatever news is out there, whatever that they have that they need to share. We do know that the NCC, which is the National Civic Commission for Education. Civic Education, I think. The National Commission for Civic Education, the NCCE. I think that they exist in Ghana. That's their work. That's their work. But we do know that they're ill-resourced. And so we're going to find ways to link up more with them to see whether or not we can't amplify the work that they do using our platforms. So we think that, yes, we're on the right path in terms of information, but we do need to strengthen and build those institutions that are important to any democracy, and we can't do it alone. So we're going to be reaching out to them and working with and through them.
That's aspiration 3 right there, where we call for an Africa of good governance, democracy, respect for human rights, justice, and the rule of law. Thank you very much, Juliet, for giving us your time. We know that it was a very busy day today, but you managed to make it. And I suspect that anyone who also wants some more information about Penplusbytes can just do a Google search, find you, and be able to reach out to you as well.
Yes.
And you'll be able to reach out personally to them as well. Fantastic. Thank you so very much. So that's a wrap for the show. Thank you very much for also giving us a lot of your time to watch this show. The segments and the whole show. Agenda 2063 remains the only show in Ghana, the region, and the continent telling authentic stories about the AU, its institutions, and how the AU can become a global player through understanding and appreciation of Agenda 2063. It's a document that is not too difficult to read, and pray that anytime you know that this show is on, you pick it up and make sure that you have your check list of questions that you think you can offer us to help improve some of the programming that we do for the show as well. Continue to appreciate the feedback that you've been giving us, and we hope that the segments have been very useful for you as well. The APRM Watch here in East Africa, getting a better and more global perspective of the continent. Thank you very much once again for this show. We hope to speak to you next time. Have a great day. Goodbye.